I will now just sort of share, I guess, a local on the ground perspective of what's been happening in the housing context in the city of Miramichi. Then Mayor Rogers will come up and do the same for Fredericton. So we do get both a perspective from one of the three CMAs and one of the other cities in the north, as Richard's provided some good information on both. So I will just start to say that before the current crisis, when I came in as mayor, even in 2016, Miramichi has had a 0 to 1% vacancy rate since that time, even longer, for over a decade. There are a number of factors of that. We had not seen any substantive development, multi-unit development, or even single-family unit development for that matter, in decades. Like some of the other northern cities, I'm sure you could relate. You know, we had a lot of our young people leaving for decades to other areas of the province and the country. We had an economic decline with all of our mills closing. So it wasn't exactly an investment-ready scenario. And we're making some progress on some of those fronts. But we started even before the current crisis already in a local 0 to 1% vacancy scenario. We were feeling the crunch, and we continue to do so. And so we have, as has been alluded to in the slides, we've had also in that time significant population decline. From when we became a city in 1995 until 2016, our population declined 25%. From starting as a city at above 20,000 into below 17,000 or so. I'm pleased to say in the 2020 census, we are growing again, and we've had good success across both record numbers of immigrants, permanent residents, labor-driven immigrants, and also an influx of people, as Richard's pointed out, from Ontario, BC, and Alberta moving to Miramichi for that quality of life and the affordability, despite the fact that it's on the rise. So in our community, people are paying the same amount for 2-bedroom rental units as they are in Halifax, or in some cases even Toronto. So what we did a few years ago was start with a needs assessment. So we engaged a study, and what we found out was, or we could quantify, was two things. Both we had gaps in needs across the entire housing continuum, no surprise there. And we also had an extreme lack of housing diversity. So because of, as Richard mentioned, and I had this validated, because in those early days, we of course knew that we needed housing even before we got to this boiling point. At that point, you could still have some modest hope that you could find yourself somewhere to live. Now it's basically impossible. But when we talk to developers, because first of all, as you would know in the other smaller northern communities, we don't necessarily have big scale developers in our community, but we went out and we talked to developers around the Maritimes, and I was told the same thing. No, we won't invest in your community because you have a declining population and an aging population. So we can't even, at that point, we couldn't even be certain we could fill it at that time. And when we look at the demographics of your aging population, in 20 years, it's not a good investment. So we've had some turnaround in terms of the population. A lot of the influx we're seeing are much younger. They're young families, big families in some cases. So that the demographics of our ages are improving. But nonetheless, a significant lack of housing diversity. So out of that report, there were a number of steps that we have taken that we could take within our own means. So we established a couple of housing incentives. So we have, and one of the other, as a big geographic city with a very low density, of course, one of the other findings in the study was that we're critically lacking. We also had a downtown renewal study, critically lacking in housing in our actual downtown cores. So in our new municipal development plan, we've been even more firm in indicating that we want all multi-unit developments to be in our downtowns or on main arterial roads in our transit lines. And that is now in our development plan. And we created two incentives. They each are for $10,000 a unit. One is for downtown housing development. So if you're going to build any new housing units in our defined downtown core, we'll give you $10,000 a unit on top of whatever you might be getting elsewhere. Similarly, if you're building affordable units, we'll also give you $10,000 a unit. And those affordable units don't necessarily have to be in the downtown core. They can be anywhere. And we have seen some success. In addition to that, as I mentioned, we changed the development plan, and we also have been in the process, and it's finally happened, to establish a regional housing authority. So that was one of the key takeaways, but it took us a year and a half to establish the authority. City staff really recommended against embedding it into the city. They did not want that to happen. And we understood that. So we did an RFP and nobody applied. Our economic development staff then went out and had conversations with any organization in the community that we thought could take it on and might be interested, and that yielded nothing. At the same time, with the discussions around municipal reform and increased mandates at the Service Commission, although the other neighboring communities at times see things differently, don't feel they have the same concerns as us, even in some of our very rural small neighbors, they are feeling the housing crunch as well. So the authority is fully funded for 3 years by a funding agreement, a three-way partnership between Working New Brunswick, ACOA, and the city of Miramichi. So we went to the Regional Service Commission table with an offer for a fully funded regional housing authority if they would agree to house it within the RSC. And Deputy Mayor Quinn is here with me, and it took some massaging and several meetings, but we got them there and they agreed. So we now have the housing authority up and active. The staff has been hired. He's a development expert, so that's really great. And so we're in the early days now of having that asset. In the meantime, because I think of demand, we have seen record levels of development in Miramichi. So right now there are close to 400 units of housing being built in Miramichi. This is, nobody can even remember the next, thank you. Nobody can even remember a time when we were even close to this level of development. So that is positive, but the reality is that of these almost 400 units, maybe only a couple of dozen of them are in what we would consider to be the affordable category. And when we talk about affordable housing, we know that there are these nuances. When I say affordable in this context, these couple of dozen are affordable, they're social or subsidized housing units. And all of the rest are effectively high-end market housing. So while we have record levels of development, we have not really seen any movement in market affordable housing, or what the province is now starting to call workforce housing, as we learned at our meetings in the last couple of days. So that is the most challenging piece, because that's where the pressing need is for so many of these newcomers, for the students that are showing up in our community. I had literally a dozen emails this August from students coming from across the province and around the world telling me, I'm about to start school at MBCC Miramichi in 2 weeks and I have nowhere to live. Can you please help me find somewhere to live? And the reality is, as we all know, those are incredibly difficult emails to get, because I don't have any secret housing hiding under in the wings. And so we know that it's a bottleneck. And I guess for us up to this point, and I'm interested from your presentation, Richard, we've viewed the bottleneck as developers, identifying developers willing to make these investments, in particular in the market affordable stream, and what can we be doing to help facilitate that. So in a way, maybe we're just not quite there yet, because obviously with the labor force issues, we know that getting the labor to build the housing would certainly be the next bottleneck, but I'm still on the bottleneck before finding the developers. So it's sort of unfortunate to hear that once I solve that bottleneck, I've got another bottleneck waiting. But such is life in municipal government in New Brunswick these days, I suppose. I'll mention one other quick thing that we did add into the municipal development plan, which helped a little bit, was secondary suites. So the ability to add a second living unit in your home. We added it into the municipal development plans to make secondary suites as a right. So before, you would have to go to the planning commission and apply if you wanted to add a secondary suite in your basement or your garage. Now you get to do that as a right. And so that in particular has helped to relieve some of the pressure as it relates to student housing, although it very much still exists. So I think that does, and just actually a couple of weeks ago, understanding that there are lots of solutions out there, and some of them are maybe not actually solutions. I know Mayor Rogers, I'm sure, will touch on inclusionary zoning and how, there was hope that could help move the needle, and maybe it won't. We don't know what's out there, but we've convened, I've asked council, and we'll be voting on it at an upcoming meeting, to establish a housing working group with our new housing authority expert from the RSC, with city staff, councillors, and members of the development community, with an eye on scanning what's out there and bringing back to council recommendations of what we can be doing, if anything else. I know some communities are getting into issuing RFPs specific for housing development. Should we be buying property and looking to do the same? Will inclusionary zoning help at all? So we're going to look at what we can do at our level, while we also, as an association, work towards crystallizing those asks to the province and the feds as well, but for us specifically the province. So that's a bit of what's going on in Miramichi. And